Hi everyone, this is TheConflictedCritic back with another book review, and today we're going to talk about Tahmina Durrani's very famous and very influential book, My Feudal Lord. Now, a brief intro about this book and the writer. Tahmina Durrani happens to belong to a very influential political family, and she decided to marry Mustafa Kher, who was a very important and enigmatic nobleman and politician of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's during Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's time. And this book is basically a narration, or you could say a biography, an autobiography of the time that Durrani spent with Mustafa Kher, and how we as individuals and we as a nation can learn from the experiences that Durrani had with a man like Mustafa Kher. So let's talk briefly about the events that have been narrated or that have been discussed in detail during this book, and we start off with none other than Durrani's marriage to Kher. Now, Kher, during the regime of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, was not only an influential landowner, but he was, uh, for a certain amount of time, a member of the National Assembly, and also for a certain amount of time he was the chief minister of Punjab and ardently known as the Lion of the Punjab by his faithful supporters and followers. So you could imagine that a man of his standing, of his influence and his popularity, would have taken the elite spectrum by storm, and a lot of people were very amazed, and a lot of people were very attracted and smitten by him. And one of these individuals was Tahmina Durrani, who at that time was married to her first husband, but she decided to break off her first marriage and marry a man of the caliber of Mustafa Kher. Now, it was a decision that seemed to be the right one for Durrani, who wanted a spark in her life, who wanted a man, who was exciting, who was exhilarating. But the marriage that happened was riddled with family feuds, with an array of mental, emotional, and physical abuse, torments, violence, and incarcerations, political turmoil, that it became one of the most difficult 13 years that any woman ever had to live through. But it has been documented, it has been put into a book by Durrani for everyone to read and everyone to learn from her experiences. And I commend her for writing this book, for facing her demons, for facing her fears, and discussing in detail the things that happened with her. So, not only is this marriage discussed in detail in this book, but two important political regimes of Pakistan, including Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and the dictator Zia, have been discussed as well. How Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's government progressed, how people from his own political party and his close allies, including Mustafa Kher, turned on him, and how Zia came into power and the events that ensued. Now, during Zia's regime, Mustafa Kher was exiled, and he had to spend a huge amount of time living in mostly the United Kingdom. So it's basically an outward perspective of Zia's government and how things are progressing back at home that has been expressed in this book in vivid detail. Now, the thing that makes people very uncomfortable about this book is the detail with which Durrani expresses the abuse that she had to face at the hands of Mustafa Kher, whether it be physical abuse, whether it be emotional abuse, whether it be the family feuds that a man like her, stirred or began. It is difficult to read. It is you you always have a bitter taste when you read any chapter of this book, because initially during the book you sense that it's going topsy turvy, and Durrani is stepping into a maze that she won't ever able to get out of, and you're basically this thought process or this opinion is basically verified as the book progresses. And once you start reading into the torture that Durrani has to face from a man like her, you kind of feel helpless for her, and you kind of feel as if it could have been avoided by Durrani not making that decision in the first place. But then you need to realize it from the perspective of a young woman in her early 20s, smitten by a man of status, smitten by a man of class, of supposed elegance, and then being fooled, completely fooled, uh, and then the marriage happens and the things happen, and then it's all, you could say, one of the most turbulent events of her life. And another interesting aspect that this book discusses is Durrani's role as an envoy and advisor, and even a spy for her husband. Even though her husband was a tormentor, was an abuser, was a womanizer, Durrani stood firm with her husband, which speaks of the immense amount of strength that she had as a woman. And it also is at the, you could say, the toxicity that our Pakistani society is riddled with, which makes it increasingly difficult for a woman to leave an abusive marriage, to leave an abusive home, just because society expects and demands the woman to be that symbol of strength. So even though it is a symbol of strength, it speaks highly of the character that this woman possesses, the strength of, you could say, the mental strength, the fortitude that the Rani possesses. But again, it's a poor reflection on the society and the times that we live in. So it also delves deep into the role that Durrani plays as a spy and envoy for her husband, the meetings with Indian ambassadors that she attends, with generals conspiring against Zia that she attends, and it's a very increasing outlook on the political situation of Pakistan at that time, when the Bhutto brothers are conspiring against Zia, when Mustafa Kher is conspiring against Zia, from a land thousands of miles away from Pakistan, and how exactly do those processes happen. So if you want to read up on, on a good, on exactly how a plot is hatched to depose a government, or how a spy functions, or how a secret envoy functions, the particular chapters in which Durrani's role as a spy is discussed by Durrani herself is an absolute treat to read. Now, let's talk about the significance of this book, and why this book is held in such high esteem, especially when it comes to feminist literature and the evolution of feminist literature in Pakistan. So first of all, this is probably the first ever piece of literature that was written by a Pakistani woman, documenting in detail the amount and the ferocity that happened when her husband abused her, when her family refused to support her, when on some cases her family even conspired against her and portrayed her as a villain, even when she cried out for help. And even though it's a very uncomfortable read, and it was a book that was basically criticized, and again, when this book was published, Durrani was not supported at all. She was called names, she was called an unfaithful woman. Again, there was a campaign against her by Mustafa Kher as well. But when you read this book, and when you discover the magnanimous service that it plays for feminist movements in Pakistan, you're actually amazed by the strength this woman possesses, and you realize the exact importance that this book possesses. Because once it was all out there, once the details of the abuse was all out there was nowhere to hide, there was nothing to keep from the public, and the public actually realized what kind of a man Kher was, because all of these things that are written in this book are very difficult to make up. You don't make up the vividness of abuse that is mentioned in this book. And Durrani basically talks about the entire system, the evolution of this abuse, where it began from, why it originated from this man she called her husband, and how it basically came out of him, how it transformed into acts of physical violence, into acts of emotional violence. It always began from frustration, it always began from an ego dominating the mind. It always began from a position of superiority where the man considered himself to be the owner of the woman. Because this is exactly what our society teaches us. This is exactly what a patriarchal society instills in every man and woman. And basically, her was an exact embodiment of this idea of the society and a practical implementation of it as well. And it's very unfortunate that a woman like Durrani was on the receiving end of it. But it also is a testament to her character that she was able to survive through it, and she also took upon herself the responsibility of documenting and sharing her abuse so that many other women could be encouraged by it and shout out in the open what their abusers did to them. Another very important aspect about this book is the way that it discusses the frivolity and the triviality of politicians, of our politicians especially. How our politicians have such weak ideologies and are such weak in terms of the plans that they want to execute for the public or for the greater good, that they're willing to sell off their ideology, that they're willing to sell off their thought process just for the sake of climbing to power, just for the sake of reaching back to the throne, the hypothetical throne that they've built within their heads. And even though Mustafa Khar claimed to be a socialist, claimed to be a supporter of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who also, People's Party in Pakistan is considered to be a socialist party on broader terms, and Khar was also of the same opinion. But the way that he sold himself to to people of power, to people of influence, just so he could hold on to a seat in the National Assembly, just so he could hold on to the influence, the political influence that he had amongst the elites and amongst the people. It's so damning to watch, and you realize that every politician in this country is like that. They have ideals, supposed ideals, but they're willing to sell it off. They're willing to, trade it for power. So they're power thirsty, meek, weak, and feeble creatures, which we've basically handed the reins to government to, and who are basically wreaking havoc to our lives and our economy and our future. So this book is basically an eye-opener, and I was very amused in reading the way that ideologies were sold for so little. And I was just wondering, a statesman or an ideologue like Marx would be writhing in his grave if he were to witness the way an ideology like socialism or any other political ideology is thrown to the public in a country like ours and sold to the highest bidder just to seek power. So to conclude, I think this book holds an immense place in Pakistani literature, even though I feel that this book could have been written better. I wasn't very hooked by the way that this literature proceeds, but it was an eye-opening story. It was a powerful story, I believe, and when you look at it from the greater perspective of feminist evolution in Pakistan, I think this book was a key part of that process, a revolutionary part of that process, in the way that it documents abuse, in the way that it lifts off the curtains from abuse. And to end it, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Durrani, which I felt to be really empowering, and it depicts why she decided to write this book in the first place, and put her life on the line, put her dignity on the line, put her social respect on the line, just so that women of the future could could do better and could learn and could be more unabashed in their quest for equality, in their quest for freedom, and in exposing the lies and the threats and the abuse of uh, of their abuser. So she says, I realized I could do no greater service for my country than expose the camouflage. I was determined not to waste 13 years of my life. I decided to cast a stone at hypocrisy. I decided to write this book and break the traditional silence. So hats off to Tahmina Durrani for such a powerful piece of literature. And I hope you all enjoy this book. I hope you read it. And especially anyone who wants to delve into feminist literature, I think this is a really good starting point. So yeah, until the next time we meet, have a wonderful, wonderful reading experience, and goodbye.